I came home to wine stains on my ceiling, not the floor, the ceiling. I want you to think about what kind of party produces a wine stain 8 feet above the ground on someone else's ceiling. I walked into my house at 11:30 on a Tuesday morning after 6 weeks in South Korea, rolled my suitcase through the front door, and stood in the foyer of a home that I had left immaculate, and the smell hit me first, stale alcohol and cigarette smoke, and something else underneath it, something sour and specific, the smell of a space that had been used by strangers who felt no obligation to treat it with care. The bowl was gone. I knew it immediately. My mother's bowl, the one she carried from Seoul in 1978 in a bag on her lap because she would not let it go in the hold. The hand-painted Celadon bowl that had sat on my dining room table for 11 years, gone. And I want to tell you who did this. I want to be precise about it. The president of my homeowners association hosted a fundraising gala in my home while I was on the other side of the world, without my permission, without a contract, without so much as a text message, and left the damage for me to find. He used my property like it was a venue he had rented, and then he had the extraordinary nerve to send me a bill. If someone walked into your home and treated it like this, what would you have done? Tell me, because I want to know. I want to know if there was a version of this where I handled it with less precision and still came out the same way. I don't think there was, but I want to know, what do you think? My name is Sonia Park. I am 58 years old. I live on Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, and what I'm about to tell you is documented, verified, and settled by court order. Let me take you back to the beginning. I moved to Hilton Head in 2018 after 31 years in hotel management. I spent my career running luxury properties, 4- and 5-star hotels on the East Coast mostly. My last position was regional general manager for a hospitality group that operated 6 properties in the Carolinas and Georgia. I was responsible for venues that hosted 500 people, galas, weddings, political fundraisers. I knew what events cost, what they damaged, what they required in terms of staffing and insurance, and documented consent from every single property owner involved. I did not retire from that industry and forget any of it. The house on Heron Bay Court was my retirement project, 7,000 square feet on a tidal marsh with a screened lanai that faces west so the sunsets come straight through it. I bought it in 2018 for $2.1 million, and I spent 18 months restoring it. Refinished hardwood floors, custom millwork, the kitchen entirely rebuilt with professional-grade equipment because I spent 30 years eating in hotel restaurants, and I finally wanted to cook in my own home. I furnished it over time, carefully. My mother's bowl on the dining room table, her embroidery in the upstairs hall, small things that had traveled a long way to get there. Remember that bowl. I am going to come back to it. In 2020, I accepted a consulting contract with an international hospitality group launching a new property in Seoul. It meant travel. 6, 8, 10 weeks at a stretch sometimes. I was not worried about the house. It was in a gated community with professional property management, a security system I had installed myself, and a neighbor named Clara Hodges, who had a key and checked in twice a week. Clara is 71, retired, sharp, and as it turned out, the most important witness I would ever have. Remember Clara, she matters. The Heron Bay HOA was run by a board of 7. The president was a man named Merritt Ashford. He was 57 years old, a commercial real estate developer with a significant residential portfolio on the island, and what I can only describe as a civic brand persona, the kind of man who got his name on the programs for local charity events, who sat on the county planning advisory board, who wore linen blazers to outdoor functions, and called everyone neighbor in a way that felt like a transaction. I had met him twice before I left for Seoul. He had an easy smile, the kind that takes a while to realize doesn't actually reach the eyes. The first time, he said my home was beautiful. The second time, he said the community was lucky to have someone with my professional background. I thought he meant it as a compliment. I filed it away and did not think about it again until I came home to those wine stains. I landed at Savannah Hilton Head International on November 9th, a Tuesday. I had my car in long-term parking. I drove to Heron Bay and punched the code at the gate, and I knew something was off before I even reached my driveway. There was a tire track in the lawn, one deep rut near the side entrance, the kind a delivery truck makes when it goes somewhere it has no business going. I told myself it was probably nothing. Landscapers, a service vehicle. I got out of my car, and I could already smell it through the front door. My home had been violated. I do not have a softer word for it. I walked room by room, and I kept finding things. The stain on the entryway hardwood that had not been there when I left. 3 broken stems on my mother's silk arrangement in the living room. A burn mark on the kitchen island. Someone had set something hot directly on the stone I had restored. And the dining room. The tablecloth I had left folded in the sideboard had been draped roughly over the table, and there were rings from glasses on the fabric, and the bowl was not there. I stood in the middle of that room for a long time. And then I did what 31 years in the hospitality industry trained me to do without even thinking about it. I went to my car, I got my phone, and I started photographing everything. I photographed every surface, every stain, every broken or missing item. I did not touch anything. I worked methodically, room by room, documenting, in the order I had discovered the damage. I had done a pre-trip walkthrough before I left for Seoul, a habit from my hotel years, an inventory before anything of value was left unattended, and I had photographs from that walkthrough still in my cloud storage. I had a baseline, date stamped, 6 weeks earlier, and what I was photographing now was the difference. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was what I found in my mailbox. There was an envelope from the HOA. Inside was a letter on Heron Bay HOA letterhead, signed by Merritt Ashford, dated November 6th, 3 days before I arrived home. It informed me that due to my extended absence and apparent inability to maintain community engagement, the board had exercised its right under Article 7 of the Community Bylaws to conduct a remediation review of my property, and that, following this review, the board had utilized the residence for a scheduled community appreciation event on the evening of November 4th. He used the word utilized. At the bottom of the letter, there was a fee schedule. He was billing me $2,400 for event setup and cleanup services. I want to tell you something. In 31 years of hotel management, I have had vendors overcharge me, guests damage rooms, contractors cut corners, board members make absurd demands. I have handled every version of this situation professionally and quietly. But there was a moment reading that letter, standing at my own mailbox in my driveway, where I felt something I do not have a precise name for. It was not rage. It was something quieter. It was the specific feeling of looking at a document that is so brazen, so completely unashamed of itself, that the person who wrote it clearly believed you would do nothing about it. He believed I would pay. And here is the thing. If you're going to walk into that kind of situation, Merritt Ashford, you should at least make sure the person you're sending that letter to did not spend 3 decades calculating the cost per incident on damaged luxury property. Within 48 hours of arriving home, I'd called the only person I trusted completely with what I was looking at. Vincent Caruso, 63 years old, property damage and real estate attorney, out of Beaufort, South Carolina. I had met Vince 15 years earlier when he handled a significant insurance claim for a hotel I was managing. A hurricane had taken out 2 floors of guest rooms, and Vince recovered damages so specific, so meticulously documented, that the insurance company's own adjuster told him afterward it was the cleanest claim presentation she had ever seen. We had stayed in touch. He was the kind of attorney who remembered the details of your case years later because he had read every document himself. I told him what I had found. I sent him the photographs before I finished describing them. I told him about the letter. There was a long pause on his end. Then he said, "Send me the bylaws, because here is what Vince knew, and what I suspected, and what I want to pass along to you right now. And listen carefully, because this matters. When an HOA board claims authority to utilize a member's private residence, not common property, not a shared amenity, but a member's individually owned home, they are making a legal claim that requires extraordinary documentary support. An HOA's governing documents, its CC&Rs, its bylaws, its declaration, spell out precisely what authority the board has over individually owned property. In South Carolina, as in most states, the board's authority extends to common areas and covenant enforcement. It does not extend, absent explicit and recorded consent from the homeowner, to using your private home as an event venue, period. Whatever Article 7 said, it did not say that. Nothing in a legally enforceable HOA document says that, because if it did, you would never be able to sell that house. No lender would touch a property subject to that kind of board authority. The title would be unpurchasable. Vince read the bylaws in 20 minutes and called me back. He said the word I'd been thinking since I read Ashford's letter. Trespass, he said. We start there, but I need to tell you what happened between Vince's call and what we eventually filed, because it did not go quietly. And that is the part I want you to hear. I called Merritt Ashford. I want to be honest. I did not call to negotiate. I called to understand the scope of what he believed he had done. I wanted to hear him explain it in his own words, and he did. He said the board had discussed my pattern of absence, that my home was the largest on the creek side of the community, and therefore the most appropriate venue for the event, and that they had engaged a catering company and a cleanup crew, and that I should consider the fee reasonable given the circumstances. I asked him what circumstances. He said, "Ms. Park, you were not here. You don't understand what the community needed." I wrote that down. Exact words, date, and time. I wrote it down the way I had written everything down for 30 years, not because I knew then what I would do with it, but because when something is said that boldly, you do not trust your memory to hold it perfectly, you write it down. And then I said, I understand exactly what the community needed, Merritt. I'll be in touch. And I hung up. By the end of that week, I had compiled what I was already calling the damage portfolio. It was 73 pages, photographs, pre-trip inventory, itemized damage assessment by room, fair market replacement values on every damaged or missing item, a written appraisal I had commissioned from a certified personal property appraiser for the items I could not simply replace, including my mother's bowl, which I valued not at what it would cost to buy a Celadon bowl of equivalent age, but at what it had cost in terms of its documented history and irreplaceability. That appraisal came in at $8,400, and then Clara called me. Clara Hodges had been watching my house for 6 weeks. She was the neighbor with the key, and she had been watching what happened on November 4th from her own living room window, which faced directly across to my drive-inside entrance. He had not known at the time that she was witnessing anything that required documentation. He thought the catering van and the cars and the people coming and going was something I had arranged, but when she heard the music, she said it went until past 11. She had taken a few photographs on her phone because she was surprised by the number of people. Clara had photographs of the catering van. She had a partial plate. She had photographs of cars in my driveway. She had a photograph of Merritt Ashford standing at my side entrance at 6:45 in the evening in a blazer, talking to a man she did not recognize. He was holding what appeared to be a bottle of wine. And then, because Clara is 71 and meticulous, she'd gone back and looked at the photographs more carefully after I called her, and in one of them, in the background, through the side entrance, visible on the dining room table that should have been empty, he had captured the outline of my mother's bowl. It was in the house when the party started. It was not there when I came home. I want you to sit with that. I want you to understand what was on the line here, not just the monetary value of the damage, and we eventually documented it at just over $62,000, including the bowl's appraised value, the hardwood refinishing, the kitchen island restoration, the cleaning, the psychological cost to a woman who had spent 3 decades maintaining the highest standards of property care. What was on the line was something older than money. That bowl had come from Seoul, in a bag on my mother's lap. It had survived more than I had, and it was gone because a man who wore linen blazers decided my house was a venue he was entitled to. That was the night I sat in my lanai and looked at the marsh and made a decision. I was not going to send one letter, accept a settlement, and move on. I was going to find out everything Merritt Ashford had done, because this was not his first time. Vince filed the trespass claim and the property damage suit in Beaufort County on November 22nd. Total damages sought $7,500, the $62,000 in documented property loss, plus attorney fees, plus what South Carolina law calls punitive damages for intentional trespass to real property. 2 days later, 48 hours after service, Ashford's attorney called Vince and offered a private settlement of $15,000. $15,000. I told Vince to decline. And then, here is where Merritt Ashford made the mistake that people who have done this before always make. He escalated. 3 days after we declined his settlement offer, I received a notice of an emergency board meeting. The notice claimed the board needed to address what it called unauthorized use of HOA administrative resources by a board member acting in a personal capacity, language that was clearly designed to give Ashford political cover by making it look like the board was investigating itself. And then I received, through Vince, a communication from Ashford's personal attorney suggesting that I had agreed, through my course of conduct, to make my property available for community events by having previously attended 2 HOA gatherings and expressed support for community programming, 2 HOA potlucks. He was claiming 2 potlucks I attended constituted my consent to having my home used as an event venue while I was out of the country. I want to tell you honestly, and I am not easily rattled, that night I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time. I did not start the engine. I thought about what it would cost to simply take the $15,000 and be done. I thought about the time and the documentation and the months of hearings, and then I thought about my mother and about what it means when someone assumes you will accept less than what you are owed because the fight is inconvenient. I called Vince in the morning and told him to file for discovery. What discovery produced is the reason we are having this conversation. Vince submitted a formal records request to the HOA management company for all board communications, event planning documents, and financial records related to November 4th. Standard procedure in South Carolina, HOA litigation. The board cannot withhold those records. And what came back, in 1,200 pages of board emails and financial documents, was something neither Vince nor I had anticipated. This was not the first time. In March of 2022, while a homeowner named Gerald Pierce was traveling for work, Ashford had arranged a community appreciation dinner at Pierce's property, a 6-bedroom home on the north end of the community. Pierce had received a clean-up fee and, according to the emails, had complained privately but never formally pursued it. In August of that same year, the back patio and pool area of a property owned by a woman named Delia Foster had been used for a board strategy retreat while she was visiting family in Ohio. Same pattern, same language in the follow-up communications, same cleanup fee, 3 properties, 3 absent homeowners, and in each case, the homeowner had accepted the fee and gone quiet, until me. Vince called me after he finished reading. "Sonia," he said, "this is a pattern, and in South Carolina, a pattern of intentional trespass to residential property can support a claim for treble damages. Treble damages, that means the court can award up to 3 times the amount of the actual harm, not as punishment, but as a statutory recognition that intentional, repeated conduct is categorically different from a single mistake. The court date was set for February 14th. That gave us 11 weeks. 11 weeks to build a case not just around what happened to me, but around what Ashford had done to 3 homeowners over 2 years. Gerald Pierce agreed to provide a declaration. Delia Foster agreed to provide a declaration. Vince brought in a forensic accountant who found that the catering invoices for all 3 events had been processed through HOA administrative accounts, meaning Ashford had used the community's own operating funds to pay for access to homeowners' private residences. And then, 6 days before the hearing, Ashford's attorney contacted Vince with a new offer, $120,000, full confidentiality, no admission of liability. I said no, not because I needed the money, because confidentiality would have meant the next homeowner who traveled and came home to wine stains on their ceiling would never know his name, and I was not willing to do that. We walked into Beaufort County Civil Court on February 14th. I wore a grey blazer. I sat next to Vince, and I looked straight ahead. Ashford was at the opposite table with 2 attorneys. His posture, for once, was not the easy certainty I was used to. There was something careful and contracted about the way he sat, and I recognized it because I had seen it before, in vendors who knew the claim was valid, in contractors who knew the inspection was going to find what they hoped it would not find, the specific posture of a person waiting to see how much will be revealed. The hearing lasted 3.5 hours. The judge reviewed the damage documentation, the photographic evidence, Clara's testimony, the patent evidence from Pierce and Foster, and the board financial records. Ashford's attorney argued that the bylaws gave the board discretion over community programming. The judge asked him to point to the specific clause that authorized the board to physically access and utilize an individually owned residence. He could not. There is a legal principle I want to share with you here because it matters beyond my case. An HOA's authority, no matter how broadly written in its governing documents, cannot override a homeowner's fundamental property right to exclude. The right to exclude is the core of property ownership in American law. It means you decide who comes onto your land and into your home. An HOA can fine you for paint colors. It can restrict your ability to rent. It can place assessments on you for common area maintenance, but it cannot, under any legitimate legal interpretation, use your private residence without your explicit, documented, individually given consent. If anyone tells you otherwise, if any HOA board, management company, or attorney suggests that membership in an HOA constitutes consent to this kind of access, get a property rights attorney on the phone that day. The judgment came 3 weeks later. The court awarded actual damages of $62,400. It awarded punitive damages based on the pattern evidence. It ordered Ashford to pay Vince's legal fees in full. Total judgment, $204,000, and it ordered the Heron Bay HOA board to conduct a formal audit of all expenditures under Ashford's presidency and to distribute the findings to every homeowner in the community. Merritt Ashford resigned from the board the day the judgment was issued. I drove home from Beaufort on a Tuesday afternoon in late March. The marsh was turning green. I pulled into my driveway, and I sat there for a minute with the engine off, just quiet, the way things can be quiet after something has been resolved. I walked inside. The floors were refinished. The kitchen island was restored. The entryway was clean. Everything was as it should be. The bowl is still gone. I want to be honest about that. The catering company said they had no record of removing it. Ashford denied knowing anything about it. It was not recovered. I do not know if it was broken and thrown away, or if someone took it. That part of the story does not have a resolution, and I have had to make my peace with the fact that some things that are taken cannot be returned, only compensated for. The money is in a foundation I set up in my mother's name for Korean American students pursuing hospitality management degrees. It is not what I wanted, but it is something. The day after I got home from court, I made myself a cup of tea, and I sat on the lanai, and I watched the marsh go through its morning changes. The light comes through the cordgrass differently at different hours. I have watched it long enough now to know the difference, and I thought about what Merritt Ashford said on the phone, that I was not there, that I did not understand what the community needed. He was right that I was not there, but what the community needed was for someone to come home and to look at what had happened in their house and decide it was worth documenting, worth fighting, worth the 18 months of legal process to get an answer that said, this was wrong, this was always wrong, and the name of the person who did it is now in a public court record. What I want you to take from this is practical. Before you travel, document your home. Photographs, room by room, dated. Keep them in cloud storage. It takes 40 minutes, and it is the most important 40 minutes you will spend. Know your HOA's governing documents, specifically what authority they claim over your property and what that authority does and does not include under your state's HOA statute. And if you receive a communication from a board claiming to have accessed your property without your consent, do not pay first. Do not negotiate first. Call a property rights attorney the same day. Your home is not a community asset. It is yours. The deed says so. My name is Sonia Park. I am 58 years old. I still live at 14 Heron Bay Court on Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. I have been back from Seoul twice since the judgment. I walk through that front door and I smell my own home. Coffee, the marsh, the woodwork, and it smells exactly the way it should. Like mine. If you have a story about someone who decided your property was theirs to use, drop it in the comments. I read them all, and if this meant something to you, share it. There are people out there who got a letter like the one I got and paid the fee and stayed quiet because they thought no one would believe them. I want them to know someone will.